The invitation arrived on cream-colored biopaper that probably cost more than most planetary defense budgets, written in that peculiar diplomatic script that somehow managed to be both flowery and condescending. Ambassador Cathari of the Zenithian Commonwealth had outdone themselves this time. A cultural exchange and refinement symposium aboard their newest orbital palace, complete with 17 different clauses about appropriate attire and behavioral expectations. Most species would have spent weeks agonizing over the dress code. The crystalline hegemony would grow new prismatic shells specifically for the occasion. The Verdant Collective would cultivate ceremonial flowering arrangements that took 3 months to bloom properly. Even the usually practical Feroxy would commission artisans to forge decorative exoskeletons that served no purpose beyond looking impressively metallic. Humanity, predictably, took a different approach. You realize they're expecting flowing robes and enlightened discourse about the transcendence of primitive urges, said Director Hawthorne, reviewing the invitation for the 7th time that morning. The Terran Diplomatic Corps had been granted exactly 1 representative slot, a courtesy that felt more like a test than an honor. "Transcendence is overrated," replied the woman, examining her reflection in the armory's polished steel wall. She adjusted the leather straps holding her breastplate in place, the metal scarred and darkened, with what appeared to be decades of hard use. "Besides, they asked for cultural authenticity. I'm being authentic." "Authentic to what, exactly? The 12th century? The humanity?" She lifted a battle-worn sword, checking the edge with professional interest. "Every species up there is going to parade around, pretending they evolved beyond their violent instincts. Meanwhile, we turned ours into an art form." The director watched as she secured the weapon to her belt with practiced efficiency. The entire ensemble was historically accurate down to the last rivet. Plate armor that had seen actual combat, a surcoat bearing heraldic symbols that meant something to someone centuries dead, and boots that looked like they'd marched through more than one battlefield. The effect was completed by what appeared to be dried blood on several pieces, giving the whole arrangement an authentically medieval aroma of iron and old violence. "The other delegates are going to think we're barbarians." "The other delegates think we're barbarians already. At least this way, we're barbarians with style." 3 hours later, the shuttle docked with Zenithian Station Aurelius, a monument to aesthetic excess that made most art museums look understated. The human delegate emerged from the airlock with the measured pace of someone wearing 40 pounds of steel, her armored boots ringing against the polished floors with each step. The reception committee froze. Ambassador Cathvari, resplendent in robes that shifted color with their emotional state, cycled rapidly through what could charitably be called a rainbow of diplomatic horror. Their 4 eyes blinked in sequence, as if hoping the apparition might disappear between cycles. "Welcome to, that is, we are honored by your, are you perhaps lost? The Historical Reenactment Society meets on Deck 7. Greetings, noble Cathvari." The human executed a perfect medieval bow, one hand resting on her sword hilt. "I am Lady Commander of the Terran delegation, here to honor your gracious invitation to cultural exchange. Your station brings great glory to your house." A crystalline hegemony delegate, their translucent body refracting the station's ambient light into prismatic displays of confusion, chimed in harmonics that roughly translated to, "Is this some form of elaborate jest?" Jest. The human straightened, hand moving to her sword. "Do you question my honor, Crystal Bearer?" The crystalline's harmonic frequency shifted to panic. "No, no questioning, much honor, very authentic." Director Vesk of the Feroxy delegation, whose own ceremonial exoskeleton was polished to mirror brightness, stepped forward with the careful movements of someone trying to prevent an interstellar incident. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding regarding appropriate attire for this gathering. My attire is entirely appropriate, the human replied, adjusting her gauntlets with metallic scraping sounds that made several delegates flinch. Your invitation specified formal cultural dress. This is formal cultural dress. But surely human culture has evolved beyond such martial expressions. Evolved beyond? The human's laugh echoed off the station's vaulted ceilings. Good director, you mistake advancement for abandonment. We did not evolve beyond warfare. We refined it, perfected it, turned it into philosophy, literature, and sport. Other species transcended their violent past. We made ours into entertainment. Ambassador Kethvari's robes shifted to deep purple, either profound contemplation or mild nausea. Entertainment? Indeed. We have entire industries dedicated to recreating historical battles for public enjoyment. Schools where children learn the weapons and tactics of their ancestors. Festivals celebrating warriors who died centuries before their great-grandparents were born. She gestured to her armor. This is not costume, honored ambassador. This is heritage. A delegate from the empathic concordat, whose telepathic abilities were apparently being overwhelmed by the collective confusion in the room, pressed delicate fingers to their temple. The emotional resonance is intense. There is pride here, but also something else, something we do not recognize. Nostalgia, the humans supplied helpfully. We are perhaps the only species that grows sentimental about violence. We write poetry about battles, compose music about fallen warriors, and teach our young that death in combat is the highest honor, not because we glorify death, but because we understand that civilization requires guardians. Guardians against what? Asked a Vergent Collective representative, their flower crown wilting slightly in distress. Against those who would destroy civilization naturally. Your species achieved peace by eliminating the conditions that create conflict. Admirable, certainly. We achieved peace by becoming so effective at conflict that only fools would challenge us. She smiled, the expression somehow more unsettling than a scowl. The result is the same, but our method has better stories. The reception hall had gone remarkably quiet. Even the station's background harmonics seemed muted, as if the AI was holding its breath. Ambassador Kethvari cleared their throat, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Perhaps we should proceed to the main assembly hall. The opening ceremonies are scheduled to begin shortly. Excellent. The human fell into step beside them, her armor clanking with each stride. I look forward to learning about your cultural achievements. War makes for fascinating comparative study. As they walked through corridors lined with delegates who pressed themselves against the walls to let the armored figure pass, whispered conversations rippled in their wake. The crystalline hegemony delegates chimed in frequencies that suggested acute bewilderment. The empathic concordat representatives clustered together, apparently seeking emotional support from each other's telepathic presence. Behind them all, the human strode with perfect medieval bearing, occasionally nodding respectfully to other delegates, as if she were entering a royal court rather than a cultural symposium. Her sword remained peacefully sheathed, but somehow managed to seem like a promise rather than mere decoration. Director Hawthorne, monitoring the proceedings from Earth via quantum entanglement communicator, rubbed his temples as the reports filtered in. She's been there 20 minutes and already has half the galaxy convinced we're planning to invade something. His aide, reviewing the diplomatic feeds, looked up from her console. Actually, sir, the preliminary reports suggest they're more confused than frightened. Apparently, none of them can figure out whether she's the most honest delegate they've ever met, or if this is the most elaborate psychological warfare operation in galactic history. Knowing her, it's probably both. The opening ceremonies were scheduled to begin in 1 hour. By then, every delegate in attendance would have formed an opinion about humanity's cultural representative. Most of those opinions would be wrong, but all of them would be memorable. The human, meanwhile, continued her stately progress through the station, treating each new introduction like a matter of diplomatic honor and responding to every confused question with the patient courtesy of someone who had never doubted that armored combat was perfectly appropriate for a cultural exchange. After all, they had asked for authenticity. The main assembly hall resembled a concert venue designed by committee, soaring architecture that somehow managed to be both impressive and completely lacking in personality. Delegates had arranged themselves in species-specific clusters, creating a visual taxonomy of galactic civilization that would have fascinated anthropologists and horrified interior decorators in equal measure. The Zenithian Commonwealth's presentation went first, naturally. Ambassador Kethvari floated gracefully to the central platform, their robes now shifting through a carefully choreographed spectrum of colors that apparently conveyed deep philosophical meaning. They spoke for precisely 18 minutes about the mathematics of harmony, demonstrating sonic frequencies that could induce transcendental meditation states in 17 different species. Polite applause followed, the kind that suggested everyone was impressed by the technical achievement, while secretly wondering if they'd missed the point. The crystalline hegemony followed with a light sculpture demonstration that transformed the hall's atmosphere into something resembling the inside of a prism during an earthquake. Beautiful, certainly, but the kind of beauty that made you slightly nauseous if you watched too long. Magnificent, whispered the Verdant Collective's representative to their neighbor. Such dedication to aesthetic purity. The Feroxy delegation presented next, unveiling architectural holographs of cities that defied conventional physics through sheer engineering stubbornness. Gravity-defying spires twisted into mathematical impossibilities, while maintaining perfect structural integrity, a testament to their species' conviction that the universe's laws were more like suggestions. Each presentation followed the same pattern. Elevated concepts, refined execution, and the subtle implication that primitive impulses were obstacles to be overcome, rather than forces to be understood. Then came humanity's turn. The Lady Commander approached the platform with the same measured pace she'd maintained since arrival, her boots striking the floor in rhythm with what sounded suspiciously like a funeral march. She reached the center, turned to face the assembled delegates, and placed one gauntleted hand on her sword hilt. Not threateningly, but with the casual familiarity of someone adjusting their glasses. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly without amplification, "you have shared with us the heights of your civilizations, the transcendence of base instincts, the pursuit of perfect harmony, the conquest of physical limitations through intellect and artistry. These achievements deserve admiration." Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. Perhaps the human would surprise them with unexpected sophistication. "However, I believe you have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of human cultural development. We did not achieve greatness despite our capacity for violence. We achieved it because of that capacity." The murmurs stopped. "Consider the sword." She drew the weapon in one fluid motion, holding it aloft where the hall's lighting caught the blade's edge. Several delegates instinctively leaned back. "You see an instrument of destruction. We see the culmination of metallurgy, engineering, artistry, and philosophical discipline. This blade required advances in mining, smelting, tempering, and precision manufacturing. Its creation demanded cooperation between miners, smiths, and artisans across multiple generations." She lowered the sword, resting its point against the platform floor. "But more than that, it required the development of codes of conduct, when violence is justified, how it should be applied, what limits constrain its use. Every human warrior tradition includes elaborate rules governing honorable combat. These codes became the foundation of our legal systems, our concepts of justice, and our understanding of personal responsibility. A delegate from the Pacifist Alliance, a species that had eliminated aggressive behavior through genetic modification 3 millennia ago, raised a tentative appendage. But surely such martial philosophies have been superseded by more enlightened approaches? Superseded? The Lady Commander's smile could have cut glass. Good delegate, you mistake evolution for abandonment. Let me demonstrate. She sheathed the sword and moved to a clear section of the platform. This is kata, a training form developed by human warriors to perfect combat techniques through repetitive practice. She began a slow, precise sequence of movements, empty hands tracing patterns that suggested the presence of invisible weapons. What you observe is meditation in motion, physical poetry that trains both body and mind simultaneously. The movements flowed like water, each transition balanced and purposeful. What had begun as a demonstration of combat techniques gradually revealed itself as something closer to dance, if dance could somehow convey the mathematics of applied violence. Our greatest military strategists are studied as philosophers. Our most celebrated warriors are remembered as poets. The human concept of martial arts encompasses not just fighting techniques, but entire systems of ethics, aesthetics, and spiritual development. She completed the sequence with a formal bow. We turned warfare into a path to enlightenment. Director Vesk of the Feroxy leaned forward, his polished exoskeleton reflecting the hall's ambient lighting. You speak of violence as if it were creative force? All creation requires destruction, the Lady Commander replied. To build something new, you must first clear away what came before. Human civilization advanced through conflict, not random violence, but purposeful struggle against obstacles, enemies, and our own limitations. Each war taught us lessons that shaped our technology, our social structures, and our understanding of ourselves. She gestured to the assembled delegates. Your species achieved peace through the elimination of conflict. Admirable, but limiting. You removed the pressure that forges strength, the resistance that builds character, the necessity that drives innovation. We maintained that pressure and learned to direct it constructively. Constructively? The empathic Concordat's representative seemed genuinely perplexed. How can violence be constructive? Competition drives evolution. Conflict reveals truth. Struggle builds resilience. The Lady Commander's voice took on the cadence of someone reciting fundamental principles. Humans who have never faced genuine hardship lack depth of character. Societies that have never been tested lack the wisdom to recognize real threats. Peace achieved through the absence of challenge is merely stagnation, wearing a prettier name. She walked to the edge of the platform, close enough that several front-row delegates could probably smell the oil she used to maintain her armor. We celebrate warriors not because they killed efficiently, but because they were willing to die for principles greater than themselves. Self-sacrifice in service of others represents the highest human virtue. Violence, properly applied, becomes an expression of love. The hall had gone completely silent. Even the background harmonics had ceased, as if the station's AI was too fascinated to remember its routine functions. Ambassador Kethvari's robes had shifted to a color that didn't exist in their normal spectrum. Deep indigo shot through with silver threads that pulsed like a nervous heartbeat. You suggest that aggression is virtuous. I suggest that the capacity for controlled aggression in defense of one's principles is the foundation of all virtue. A being incapable of violence is also incapable of choosing non-violence. The choice to refrain from harmful action only has moral weight if harmful action remains a genuine option. She returned to the center of the platform, hands clasped behind her back in a posture that somehow managed to be both respectful and ready for immediate action. Human children learn this through play fighting, competitive sports, and games that simulate conflict. We teach them to channel aggressive impulses into constructive outlets, to understand the difference between necessary force and cruelty, to recognize when violence serves justice and when it serves only ego. But the cost, whispered the Verdant Collective's representative. The suffering? The destruction? Yes, the Lady Commander agreed solemnly. The cost is terrible. We remember every price paid, honor every sacrifice made, mourn every life lost. But we also understand that some things are worth dying for, and that the willingness to pay that price is what makes them sacred. She surveyed the assembly, her gaze moving from species to species with the assessment of someone taking measure of potential allies or enemies. You have built a civilization based on the avoidance of conflict. Beautiful, peaceful, stable, but fragile. What happens when you encounter something that cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or enlightened into cooperation? What happens when your only choices are to fight or to surrender everything you value? The question hung in the recycled air like incense in a cathedral, heavy, pervasive, and impossible to ignore. High Chancellor Vexthara of the Supremacist Coalition had been waiting for this moment since the humans' presentation began. Their species had conquered 12 star systems through what they diplomatically termed cultural integration, a process that invariably resulted in the original inhabitants developing a sudden enthusiasm for supremacist values, usually at the point of advanced weaponry. They rose from their delegations section with the fluid grace of a predator who had never encountered anything capable of fighting back. Their biometallic carapace gleamed with embedded circuitry that pulsed in patterns designed to induce submission responses in most sentient species. Fascinating theories, Vexthara said, their voice modulated to carry undertones of condescension that worked on a neurological level. But theories remain academic until tested against reality. Your species speaks eloquently of warrior virtues, yet you send a single representative in decorative metal to represent your entire civilization. One must question whether humans possess the courage their philosophy claims to celebrate. The assembly shifted with the electrical tension that precedes either violence or extremely awkward diplomatic incidents. Ambassador Kethvari's robes cycled through warning colors while their 4 eyes searched for emergency exits that wouldn't compromise their dignity. The Lady Commander turned toward Vexthara with the deliberate movement of someone who had been expecting this exact development. Her expression remained perfectly composed, but something in her posture suggested that decorative metal was about to become considerably less decorative. "High Chancellor," she said, inclining her head precisely the amount required by diplomatic protocol, and not 1 degree more. "You question human courage. This seems to call for clarification through practical demonstration." "Indeed it does," Vexthara replied, apparently unaware that they had just stepped into something considerably deeper than a philosophical debate. "Perhaps you would be willing to substantiate your claims through direct evidence?" The Lady Commander smiled, the kind of smile that made experienced diplomats start updating their insurance policies. "Are you formally challenging me to single combat, High Chancellor?" The words dropped into the assembly hall like a neutron bomb in a library. Delegates who had been following the exchange with academic interest suddenly found themselves witnessing what appeared to be the galaxy's first diplomatic duel in approximately 3,000 years. Combat. Vexthara's biocircuitry flickered, with what might have been surprise, or might have been anticipation. How wonderfully primitive. Yes, human. I believe I am. Excellent. The Lady Commander began removing her gauntlets with practiced efficiency. I accept your challenge. Shall we discuss terms? Ambassador Kethvari materialized between them with the desperate speed of someone trying to prevent an interstellar incident. Surely this is unnecessary. Perhaps a philosophical debate would... The High Chancellor has questioned my people's honor, the Lady Commander interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of finality usually reserved for court verdicts. Among humans, such challenges are resolved through combat. To refuse would validate their accusation of cowardice. But we are civilized beings, protested the Empathic Concordat's representative. Violence cannot be the solution to diplomatic disagreements. We not? Asked Vexthara, apparently warming to the concept. The human claims that conflict reveals truth. Let us discover what truth emerges when theory meets practice. Director Vesk of the Feroxy delegation consulted what appeared to be a portable legal database. According to Galactic Diplomatic Code Section 847C, technically permissible, provided both parties consent and appropriate safety measures are implemented. Safety measures? The Lady Commander raised an eyebrow. High Chancellor, do you require protective equipment for our engagement? Vexthara's carapace shifted to a deeper shade of metallic green, either amusement or predatory anticipation. I believe my natural defenses will suffice, unless you wish to reconsider your acceptance. Not at all. However, proper protocol requires that we establish the rules of engagement. Weapons permitted, personal preference, duration limits, until one party yields or becomes incapable of continuing. Acceptable, the Lady Commander nodded approvingly. And the stakes? This question seemed to catch Vexthara off guard. Stakes? Naturally, honor demands that something meaningful be wagered. I propose that the victor's species be acknowledged as possessing superior understanding of courage and its practical applications. The High Chancellor's biocircuitry pulsed more rapidly. Agreed. Ambassador Kethvari had progressed through the entire spectrum of diplomatic panic and was now cycling back through colors that probably didn't have names in any civilized language. This is highly irregular. The station's insurance policies do not cover... Insurance? The Lady Commander looked genuinely puzzled. Why would insurance be relevant to a matter of honor? Meanwhile, the station's AI had apparently recovered from its earlier fascination and was now broadcasting emergency protocols in 17 different languages, while simultaneously researching legal precedents for sanctioned violence during diplomatic functions. The results were not encouraging. Attention all delegates, the AI announced in its most soothing voice. Emergency containment fields are being activated around the assembly hall. Medical teams are standing by. Please remain in your designated areas for your own safety. Containment fields. Vexthara seemed mildly offended. Are we zoo animals to be confined during feeding time? Standard precaution, replied Director Vesk, though his own exoskeleton was now displaying stress patterns that suggested he was reconsidering his species' decision to attend this particular cultural exchange. Some of our number are not optimized for exposure to kinetic conflict. The crystalline hegemony delegates had already begun clustering together, their translucent bodies refracting the emergency lighting into prismatic displays of collective anxiety. The Verdant Collective's representatives appeared to be wilting in real time, their flower crowns shedding petals like botanical tears. Perhaps, suggested the Pacifist Alliance delegate, in a voice barely above a whisper, We could resolve this through competitive meditation? Both combatants turned to stare at them with expressions of such unified bewilderment that, for a moment, species differences seemed irrelevant. Competitive meditation, the Lady Commander repeated slowly, as if testing each word for hidden meaning. It eliminates the risk of physical harm while still allowing for demonstration of mental fortitude. Vexthara's carapace had shifted to a shade that didn't exist in nature and probably shouldn't exist anywhere else. High Chancellor of the Supremist Coalition, defeated by superior meditation technique. The songs would be memorable? Indeed, agreed the Lady Commander, though I suspect they would be comedic rather than heroic. She turned back to Vexthara, her expression settling into something that was probably meant to be reassuring, but came across more like a shark attempting diplomacy. Shall we proceed with the original terms, High Chancellor? I believe the Assembly would benefit from witnessing practical application of theoretical principles. Absolutely, Vexthara replied, their biocircuitry now pulsing in patterns that suggested either supreme confidence or terminal stupidity. Let us demonstrate which species truly understands the nature of strength. The Lady Commander drew her sword in one fluid motion, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent hall, like a bell tolling for something that had died without anyone noticing. Strength, High Chancellor, is not about winning. It is about being willing to pay the price for what you believe is right. She settled into a combat stance that looked deceptively relaxed, balanced, centered, and ready to move in any direction with lethal efficiency. Let us see what you are willing to pay. The standoff lasted exactly 14 seconds before High Chancellor Vexthara made the tactical error of actually looking at their opponent. The Lady Commander stood with the patient stillness of someone who had done this before, not the theatrical posturing of ceremonial combat, but the economical readiness of a professional who understood that real violence happened quickly and ended permanently. Her sword reflected the emergency lighting in ways that suggested the edge had been maintained with obsessive care. More unsettling was her expression, which conveyed the kind of calm that comes from absolute certainty about what was going to happen next. Vexthara's biocircuitry flickered uncertainly. You seem remarkably confident for someone about to face superior biomechanical augmentation. Do I? The Lady Commander tilted her head with genuine curiosity. How interesting. I was just thinking how remarkably confident you seem for someone who has never been in a real fight. Never been? Vexthara's carapace shifted through several colors that probably indicated indignation. The Supremacist Coalition has conquered 12 star systems. Through technological superiority and overwhelming force projection against opponents who couldn't fight back effectively, the Lady Commander observed conversationally. That's not fighting, High Chancellor. That's pest control. The insult hung in the air like a challenge to the entire galactic order. Ambassador Kethvari had progressed beyond panic into the kind of resignation usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. Perhaps, they ventured weakly, we could implement a points-based scoring system. With judges? Both combatants ignored them completely. You speak as if you possess relevant experience, Vexthara said. Their voice modulated to carry threat harmonics that worked extremely well on most species and seemed to have zero effect on humans. Oh, I do. The Lady Commander's smile belonged in a museum of dangerous artifacts. Shall I share my credentials? She shifted her grip on the sword, the movement casual but somehow ominous. Bachelor's degree in medieval history from Cambridge, Master's in performance studies from Yale, 15 years as a historical combat instructor, 23 years directing period theater productions, and... Her smile widened. 37 years of medieval reenactment combat, including 6 international championships in armored tournament fighting. The silence that followed this revelation had physical weight. Tournament fighting, repeated Director Vesk slowly, as if testing the words for explosive content. Recreational combat, the Lady Commander clarified helpfully. Humans engage in organized violence for entertainment. We have leagues, tournaments, seasonal championships. Some of us make it our profession. Vexthara's biocircuitry had stopped pulsing entirely. Entertainment? Indeed. We recreate historical battles for public enjoyment, complete with authentic weapons, armor, and techniques. The blood on my equipment, she gestured to the darkened stains on her breastplate, is mostly ketchup, though some of it is from that unfortunate incident in Normandy when Sir Edmund forgot to blunt his spear tip. Ambassador Kethvari's robes had achieved a color that existed somewhere beyond the visible spectrum. Ketchup? Tomato-based condiment. Adds verisimilitude to the performance while remaining completely harmless. Though I should mention that the weapons are entirely authentic. Museum Questral replicas of pieces that saw actual medieval combat. Perfectly functional, just not technically ancient. The assembly hall had achieved a level of quiet normally associated with libraries, morgues, and the moments before cosmic disasters. "You're an actress," Vexthara said, their voice carrying the kind of bewilderment usually reserved for discovering that fundamental constants of physics had been updated without notice. "Theater professor, actually. Though I prefer performance artist, specializing in historical authenticity. I volunteered for this assignment because the diplomatic corps needed someone who could represent human martial culture with appropriate gravitas. They assumed this meant a military officer. I interpreted it more creatively." She executed another perfect medieval bow, this time with a theatrical flourish that made it clear the gesture was performance rather than protocol. The role required complete commitment to authenticity. "I've been in character since departing Earth." Director Vesk consulted his legal database again, probably hoping it contained precedents for diplomatic incidents involving method acting. "You've been performing this entire time?" "Performance and authenticity are not mutually exclusive," the Lady Commander replied, somehow managing to sound precitorial while still holding a sword. "Everything I've told you about human warrior culture is historically accurate. Every technique I've demonstrated has been preserved through centuries of traditional practice. The difference is that we preserve these traditions as cultural heritage rather than active military doctrine. But the challenge," Vexthara began, "remains entirely valid. You questioned human courage. I accepted your challenge according to proper medieval protocols. The fact that I learned those protocols from historical texts, rather than military training, doesn't make them less legitimate." She raised the sword again, the blade catching the light with professional precision. "The question now is whether you wish to proceed with combat against someone who has dedicated her life to perfecting the techniques of historical warriors, or whether you'd prefer to reconsider your assessment of human character." Vexthara stared at the weapon, their biocircuitry cycling through patterns that suggested rapid internal calculations. "You would actually fight, even knowing it's unnecessary?" "High Chancellor, you seem to be laboring under a fundamental misunderstanding." The Lady Commander's expression grew serious. "Nothing about this is unnecessary. You challenged my people's honor. In doing so, you invoked cultural protocols that have governed human behavior for millennia. The fact that we've transformed those protocols into arts, sport, and entertainment doesn't diminish their significance. It enhances it." She lowered the sword until its point rested against the floor, but her grip remained ready. "We didn't abandon our warrior heritage when we achieved civilization. We refined it, codified it, and made it accessible to anyone willing to learn. Every human child can access the same traditions that shaped Alexander, Caesar, or Joan of Arc. We democratized heroism. And yet, observed the empathic Concordat's representative, you've also revealed that what we assumed was active military culture is actually historical preservation? Active military culture informed by historical preservation, the Lady Commander corrected. Our soldiers study the same texts I teach. Our strategies incorporate lessons learned from every conflict in human history. Our concepts of honor, duty, and sacrifice remain unchanged from those held by warriors who died before your species developed spaceflight. She gestured to the assembled delegates with her free hand. You've spent this entire symposium trying to demonstrate how far you've evolved beyond your primitive origins. We've demonstrated how much wisdom those origins contained, and how that wisdom continues to shape our civilization. Ambassador Kethari's robes had settled into a deep gold that suggested either profound respect or complete nervous exhaustion. So, humanity's representative is simultaneously authentic and performative. All culture is performative, the Lady Commander replied. The difference is that we're honest about it. We acknowledge that civilization requires both the capacity for violence and the wisdom to refrain from it. We teach both simultaneously, through traditions that transform potentially destructive impulses into constructive expressions. She sheathed her sword with ceremonial precision. High Chancellor Vexthara, your challenge has served its purpose. You have witnessed the reality of human martial tradition, not as historical artifact, but as living culture that continues to shape our values, our art, and our understanding of what courage actually means. Vexthara's biocircuitry had stabilized into patterns that suggested something approaching respect. And if I had insisted on proceeding with actual combat, then you would have discovered that performance training and real combat preparation produce remarkably similar results. The sword may be a replica, but the calluses on my hands are entirely authentic. The Lady Commander smiled. Not the predatory expression she'd worn earlier, but something warmer and considerably more human. Besides, High Chancellor, you've already demonstrated more courage than most of your peers by being willing to challenge what you perceived as a threat. That speaks well of your character, even if your initial assessment was incorrect. She turned to address the full assembly, her voice carrying the projection techniques of someone trained for theater. Honored delegates, you came here expecting to witness the transcendence of primitive impulses. Instead, you've seen their transformation into cultural foundation. We didn't evolve beyond our capacity for violence. We evolved it into art, philosophy, and the bedrock of our civilization. The hall remained silent, but it was the silence of contemplation rather than shock. Perhaps, she concluded, the question isn't whether your species have truly evolved beyond conflict, but whether you've evolved beyond the wisdom that conflict can teach.